Long before she ever donned a white coat, Aisha Brown sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor in Queens, surrounded by open science magazines and dog-eared journal articles. At 14, she could recite the sequences of amino acids in hemoglobin, by memory and diagram, the Watson-Crick model on her closet door in permanent marker. Her mother would find her late at night, flashlight in hand, poring over a borrowed copy of Nature, while her younger brother slept through her excited whispers about tertiary structure and catalytic efficiency. By the time she arrived at Caltech as a freshman, her reputation for relentless curiosity preceded her. Under the glow of fluorescent lab lights, Aisha moved with urgent purpose from bench to fume hood, balancing pipettes in one hand and a stack of lab notebooks in the other. She joined Professor Nguyen's protein folding group and immediately distinguished herself. Where veteran graduate students hesitated at the sight of misfolded aggregates, Aisha saw patterns. She spent hours optimizing the expression of mutant chaperone proteins in E. coli, tweaking induction times by minutes, and buffer pH by fractions, until her yield of correctly folded polypeptides soared from 15% to nearly 70%. Her breakthroughs came in the form of whiteboard scribbles that stretched from floor to ceiling. In one fateful late-night session, she stood before a 12 by 8-foot board, scrawled with differential equations and thermodynamic curves, linking entropic parameters to kinetic traps in Alzheimer's-related amyloids. When her lab mates drifted off to dinner, she remained, feet aching, heart racing, until she cracked the code that allowed selective stabilization of intermediate folding states. The next morning, she walked into the lab bleary-eyed but triumphant, greeted by Professor Nguyen's rare smile of astonishment. By the end of her junior year, Aisha had co-authored 3 peer-reviewed papers and was awarded a coveted NIH undergraduate scholarship. At departmental seminars, packed with white-coated postdocs and visiting scholars, she presented poster after poster, fielding questions about fluorescence anisotropy assays and cryo-EM reconstructions with poised confidence. Her voice never wavered, even when the room grew silent and all eyes turned to her in expectation. She tutored fellow students in quantum mechanics problem sets and organized weekend study groups for underrepresented minorities in STEM. As graduation approached, Aisha taped glossy photos of Stockholm's Nobel Auditorium above her childhood desk. Tiered wooden benches, crystalline chandeliers, the gilded lectern where heroes of science had stood. She closed her eyes each night and imagined herself walking those marbled aisles. When she received her acceptance letter to the Ivy League PhD program in chemical and molecular biology, with full fellowship, lab space on day one, and a faculty mentor renowned for immunotherapy, she carried that dream forward, ready to transform her lab-born brilliance into a world-changing discovery. 2 weeks before her scheduled defense, Aisha sat at her polished oak desk in the department office, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through tall, mullioned windows and dust motes drifting in its beams. Across from her lay the thick packet of external reviews, 24 pages of meticulously typed praise for her work on engineered T-cells, each paragraph highlighting her innovative methodology, robust experimental design, and game-changing therapeutic potential. Aisha closed her eyes and allowed herself a brief smile. At last, her years of relentless pipetting, cell culture incubations, and sleepless nights seemed on the verge of vindication. Then, she reached page 23 and froze. Amid the accolades stood a single isolating sentence in terse italics. Statistical methods insufficient to support claimed efficacy. No elaboration, no suggested remedies, just a verdict so stark it eclipsed the preceding pages of endorsements. Her pulse thundered as she reread the line, searching in vain for context. Who was reviewer number 5? And why had their lone critique been weighted so heavily? That evening, she sought answers at the hastily convened thesis committee meeting in room 412, a wood-paneled seminar room ringed with leather chairs and a single whiteboard. Seated around the table were her 3 tenured advisors, Professors Whitman, Caldwell, and Hawthorne, all white men she'd long admired for their seminal work in immunology. The chair, Professor Whitman, cleared his throat. "Dr. Brown," he began, voice measured, "while your research is undeniably promising, reviewer number 5's concerns are serious. Until you address those statistical issues, We cannot proceed with your defense. Aisha's heart pounded as she presented her case, scrolling through her R scripts and nested ANOVA tables on her laptop. My sample sizes exceed the minimally required N equals 30 per cohort, and my confidence intervals all fall within the accepted thresholds. I've even run bootstrap analyses for robustness. Her words, precise and calm, echoed against the silent walls. Yet Whitman's expression remained unyielding. Your code may run, Doctor Brown, but statistical power is not solely a function of sample size, he intoned. The committee has voted. Your defense is postponed until you submit a revised dataset. The meeting adjourned in strained formality. Aisha gathered her notes with trembling hands, every page feeling suddenly inadequate. In the hallway, she overheard whispered speculation. Perhaps she rushed the final assays. I heard reviewer number 5 is a stickler for Bayesian methods. The subtext was clear. Her brilliance no longer shielded her from scrutiny, and one line in a distant email had the power to derail her entire career. As she stepped into the golden dusk outside the ivy-clad building, Aisha pressed a hand to her chest and vowed she would not let a single critique define her work. She would delve back into her data, correct any real errors, and reclaim her right to defend the discovery that had ignited her lifelong passion. When Aisha arrived at the lab the Monday after her defense was postponed, she found the door to her bench padlocked and a yellow access suspended notice taped over the lock. The space where her flasks once bubbled and her sequencers whirred stood eerily silent. Even the smallest vial of her custom T-cell reagents, cytokines she'd painstakingly purified, had vanished from the cold room shelves. The postdocs she'd trained, once her closest collaborators, now slipped past without a glance, their benches reassigned and their project folders already emptied. Emails she sent to request access to her own data flooded her inbox with generic replies. Your request is under review, or worse, no reply at all. Every hallway now felt like a gauntlet. Faculty who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact, and whispered conversations stilled in her presence. In the solitude of her empty office, Aisha felt the sting of betrayal. Her years of meticulous work reduced to a footnote by a single, unelaborated critique. That evening, she retreated to her small apartment, its walls covered with inspirational posters from past laureates. Determined not to let a procedural coup define her career, she reopened every raw data file and statistical output stored on her personal drive. As the campus lights dimmed, she pored over each dataset, re-examining cell count distributions, viability assays, and confidence intervals. Hours passed in a blur of charts and spreadsheets, until, at last, she spotted a subtle misnormalization in her group comparison calculations, an honest oversight that had slightly weakened her statistical power. Without hesitation, Aisha reran every analysis, applying the correct normalization to each sample, and watching her significance levels tighten across the board. By dawn, she had compiled a 20-page addendum, revised figures, corrected tables, and a clear step-by-step explanation of the error and its remedy. Though she had nowhere in the department to submit it electronically, she printed the entire document in a crisp binder, determined to hand it to the graduate school office herself. As the sun rose over the ivy-covered quad, Aisha clutched her binder and walked toward the administration building. Locked labs and closed doors had not silenced her. With her corrected data in hand and her resolve reforged, she vowed to stand at that front desk, day after day if necessary, until her work could speak for itself once more. On a cold November morning, Aisha Brown marched into the dean's wood-paneled office, clutching her freshly printed addendum. The dean, a bespectacled man, 2 decades her senior, offered a perfunctory nod as she laid the binder on his desk. Dr. Brown, he said, voice clipped, we received your submission. We'll schedule it for the next committee review cycle. Weeks, she knew, stretched into months. Frustration boiled over. Back in her apartment that evening, Aisha drafted a formal grievance letter alleging procedural unfairness and potential bias. She cited university regulations guaranteeing timely review of thesis materials and attached sworn statements from 2 statisticians affirming her corrected analysis. With careful precision, she laid out how reviewer number five's lone critique had been given disproportionate weight and how committee members' private remarks, gleaned from departmental gossip, hinted at cultural discomfort rather than scholarly concern. When the grievance was met with bureaucratic delays, emails forwarded, meetings pending availability, polite pleas for context, Aisha knew she needed reinforcements. She reached out to the Academic Justice Network, a nonprofit legal collective specializing in higher education disputes. Assigned a pro bono attorney, she pored over university bylaws and uncovered troubling correspondence. An internal memo in which two committee members referred to her outspoken advocacy as disruptive to departmental harmony. Armed with this evidence, Aisha arranged a confidential meeting with the graduate school ombudsperson. The ombudsperson's eyes widened as Aisha laid out the case. Locked labs, reassigned students, a suspended defense, all based not on scientific merit, but on a single, unsubstantiated critique and unspoken biases. Within 48 hours, the dean's office issued an interim directive. Her defense must proceed once her addendum was reviewed, and no further lab restrictions could be imposed. Rather than wait for the department's grudging compliance, Aisha seized the momentum. She organized a one-day symposium at a neighboring research institute titled Transparency and Rigor in Modern Immunotherapy. She invited junior faculty and graduate students, white, black, Asian, and Latino, to present cutting-edge work under her banner. The event sold out, drawing curious senior scientists and campus press. During her opening remarks, Aisha spoke plainly. Science thrives on rigorous critique, not on silencing dissent. When video highlights of the symposium went viral in academic circles, her home department faced an embarrassing choice. Stand by its opaque gatekeeping or embrace the openness Aisha championed. Within a week, the thesis committee announced a revised defense date, complete with a fresh panel that included two external members known for fair evaluation. Aisha had transformed isolation into influence, turning a single critique into a catalyst for broader reform, and she was finally poised to reclaim her rightful place at the defense table. On a crisp December morning, Aisha arrived at the ivy-clad hall for her rescheduled defense, binder of corrected data in hand and heart, pounding with equal parts dread and determination. The room was lined with tall windows and mahogany bookshelves, a long oaken table at its center, flanked by 6 stern faces, 3 new external examiners, 3 original committee members, and the department chair presiding. 2 of the examiners were women of color. The others were white men known for their integrity and peer review. The defense began with Aisha's calm, practiced summary of her thesis, engineering patient-derived T cells to recognize and eradicate solid tumors. She spoke confidently of her methodology, viral transduction protocols, viability assays, cytotoxicity measures, and the therapeutic promise of her results. As she turned to the addendum, she quietly acknowledged the earlier statistical oversight. I identified a normalization error in my group comparison analysis, she said, voice steady. I have reprocessed every dataset using the corrected approach, and I'm prepared to walk you through the revised figures. For the next 3 hours, Aisha fielded a barrage of questions. The external biostatistician probed her updated significance thresholds. The oncologist asked how her in vitro findings would translate to human trials. The senior immunologist questioned potential off-target effects in heterogeneous tumor microenvironments. With each challenge, Aisha responded with meticulous evidence, revised plots showing tighter confidence intervals, pilot animal model data from a collaborating lab, and a detailed roadmap for Phase 1 trial design. Midway through, one of the original critics, the professor who had championed reviewer number 5's remarks, leaned forward and said, Dr. Brown, your corrected data are convincing, but how do we know this isn't a statistical fluke? Aisha paused, then guided them to a side-by-side comparison of her bootstrap analyses and Bayesian credible intervals, both confirming robust effect sizes across multiple simulation runs. Her clear, unhurried explanation melted the skepticism in the room. As sunlight slanted through the windows, the chair closed his notes with a gentle smile. Dr. Brown, he said, voice warm at last, It is clear you have addressed every concern with rigor and transparency. On behalf of the committee, I congratulate you on earning your PhD relief and triumph welled in Aisha's chest as the examiners rose in applause. Outside, cameras from campus outlets snapped her beaming face as she emerged, doctorate in hand. Lab colleagues, once silent, rushed forward to embrace her. In that moment of vindication, Aisha knew her battle had done more than restore her defense. It had exposed systemic bias, elevated standards for departmental review, and shown every underrepresented scholar that perseverance and integrity could prevail against the steepest odds. 6 weeks after her triumphant defense, Aisha Brown stepped into the bright corridors of Eastview Medical Center as its newest assistant professor of immuno-oncology. The stainless steel badge on her lab coat gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, her name etched alongside a medical degree, a PhD, and the initials NIHR01, marking her first major grant award. Yet the most exhilarating moment came later that morning, when she slid open the door to her brand new 250-square-foot lab, its benches freshly wiped, shelves stocked with sterile tips and culture media, and a state-of-the-art flow cytometer awaiting her first sample. Within days, Aisha's corrected T-cell platform, now officially dubbed BrownCAR, was fast-tracked into a Phase 1 clinical trial for aggressive glioblastoma patients. She stood before a circle of white-coated clinicians and research nurses in the infusion suite, heart pounding, as she reviewed each patient's laboratory dossier, HLA typing results, pre-infusion cytokine levels, and MRI tumor volumes. When the first patient, a 52-year-old man named Mr. Alvarez, arrived with a failing Karnofsky score and resigned look, Aisha placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We've optimized your cells for precision targeting," she reassured him. "Today, we begin." Under her watchful eye, technicians gently administered the BrownCAR infusion through a slow IV drip. Aisha monitored the infusion pump's digital readout, exactly 5 million CAR-T cells per kilogram, while the nurse recorded vital signs. During the 2-hour infusion, she explained the trial protocol to Mr. Alvarez's daughter: weekly blood draws, monthly MRIs, and the pain management plan for potential cytokine release symptoms. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and suffused with the empathy that had guided her since her earliest bench experiments. Over the next fortnight, Aisha and her team collected and analyzed data, flow cytometry plots showing CAR-T expansion in peripheral blood, serum cytokine profiles confirming manageable IL-6 and IFN-G spikes, and week 2 MRI scans revealing a striking 45% reduction in Mr. Alvarez's tumor volume. When nurse investigator Chen burst into the lab, waving the radiologist's report, Aisha felt her chest tighten. She gathered the team, white and non-white postdocs alike, around the bench as the MRI images flickered on the large screen. The once edged mass, now receding like tidewater. The lab erupted in quiet cheers. Within 3 months, preliminary results from the first cohort of 10 patients reported remission rates exceeding anything published for solid tumor CAR-T therapies. Aisha drafted the manuscript in marathon writing sessions, meticulously detailing assay protocols, curve-fitting models, and patient response curves. Submitting to the New England Journal of Medicine, she emphasized not only the clinical outcomes, but also the transparent statistical corrections that had salvaged her research. As peer reviewers from Harvard and Oxford wrote back with enthusiastic endorsements, a landmark advancement and rigorous, reproducible, and revolutionary, Aisha felt the full arc of her journey. Her lab grew from 4 to 15 members, funded by renewals of her R01 grant and new support from philanthropic foundations inspired by her vision of equitable medicine. She launched a Next-Gen Immunotherapy Workshop series at national conferences, advocating for blind data review panels and bias mitigation training for grant committees. That spring, Aisha stood before the NIH's Center for Cancer Research, delivering a keynote that wove her personal odyssey with the science of T-cell engineering. She concluded, "It took one critique to almost derail me, but science, grounded in transparency, corrected by rigor, and propelled by community, rose above every barrier. Today, we stand not only on the threshold of curing disease, but of reshaping the culture of discovery itself. As the auditorium rose in applause, Aisha Brown knew that her dissertation's rebirth had rippled far beyond the lab benches. It had sparked a therapeutic revolution, redefined peer review, and set the stage for the ultimate recognition of her life's work. On a crisp December morning in Stockholm, Aisha Brown stepped onto the marble terrace of the Grand Hotel, her chest humming with anticipation. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the pale Scandinavian sky as she joined fellow laureates for the annual Nobel banquet. Inside the gilded blue hall, long tables draped in white linen stretched beneath towering columns, crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over an audience of royalty, heads of state, and the world's preeminent scientists. When the King of Sweden rose to ask Aisha to the podium, the hall fell into reverent silence. Clad in an elegant midnight blue gown, accented with a small pin bearing the Nobel rose, Aisha accepted the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. She ran her fingers over the cool gold medal hanging on a ribbon around her neck, a testament to her years of relentless innovation and hard-won vindication. As she addressed the gathered dignitaries, her voice rang clear. This honor belongs not only to me, but to every patient who believed in hope, every colleague who championed fairness, and every mentor who refused to let a single critique silence our shared pursuit of truth. Her speech traced her journey from Queen's bedroom laboratories to the ivory towers that once barred her door, culminating in the founding of the Aisha Brown Institute for Inclusive Immunotherapy. She announced a new global fellowship program under the Institute's banner, the Brown Fellowships for Equitable Science, offering full tuition PhD positions and dedicated lab resources to scholars from historically marginalized communities. Following the banquet, Aisha returned to Stockholm's City Hall for the Nobel Lecture. The vaulted Gothic space brimmed with students, press, and colleagues. With the original statistical charts and MRI images projected behind her, she recounted how a single statistical oversight nearly derailed her career, and how correcting it, combined with sheer resolve, had led to T-cell therapies now prolonging lives worldwide. She concluded with a call to the scientific community. May our laboratories never be so insular that they stifle innovation, and may our peer review processes be as rigorous in rooting out bias as they are in validating data. When the audience rose in a thunderous standing ovation, tears glistened in Aisha's eyes, not merely for her personal triumph, but for every young scientist who would now dare to dream without fear of prejudice. Back in the United States, word of Aisha's Nobel spread like wildfire. Her alma mater announced the creation of the Brown Center for Bias-Free Research, mandating blind review of theses and emphasizing diversity in grant review panels. Leading journals adopted open data policies championed by Aisha, and funding agencies introduced statutory safeguards against the kinds of gatekeeping she had endured. Meanwhile, the Aisha Brown Institute's first cohort of Brown Fellows arrived at its Atlanta headquarters, their white lab coats emblazoned with her name and an unspoken promise: science without barriers. As she flew home, medal in hand, Aisha looked out at the horizon and smiled. The path from that single critique to the Nobel stage had been fraught with roadblocks, but each obstacle had become a stepping stone for reform. In the quiet hum of the airplane, she whispered a message to every aspiring researcher: persist. Your discovery and your voice matter. And somewhere between the clouds and the earth, Aisha Brown knew her legacy would echo for generations to come.